Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is James Cockayne. I'm the New South Wales Anti-slavery Commissioner. I want to begin today by acknowledging that I'm on the land of the Cammeraygal people and that this webinar has been produced on the traditional country of the Gadigal and Darug peoples. And I want to also acknowledge their elders past and present, and the fact that First Nations peoples in New South Wales today live with the legacies of forced labour, human trafficking, and other practices that today we call modern slavery. Before we begin, I should note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared afterwards online. Allow me to see now if I have mastered the technology and can share my screen with you. I hope you can see that. If somebody could give me a shout out and just confirm that they can see that, that would be terrific. I'm just going to plow on ahead. I need to emphasize also that there are only going to be about 5 minutes per speaker today. We've had a great response. I'm really grateful to everybody for turning out at such short notice. But in order to ensure everybody gets their turn, I'll have to be quite rigid and firm and limit things to about 5 minutes per speaker. I also want to acknowledge that some of the issues we talk about today could cause upset or raise issues for you. Please do get help if you need it. These resources are all great resources you can turn to, and there are others. If it's an emergency, please call 000 or the Australian Federal Police on 131 237, and there are a number of non-police options available to you here. I'm just going to pause for a moment, as you may want to just take a photo of those numbers. Today, we're here to talk about the strategic plan that we're going to develop under the Modern Slavery Act 2018 of New South Wales. Why do we need a strategic plan? Well, first of all, because it's required by that law, but also because it will provide a framework for accountable action. It'll set out shared goals. It will provide a basis for prioritising amongst actions, and it will help us to ensure effective resource allocation in the years ahead as we seek to combat modern slavery in New South Wales. How are we going to develop that plan? Well, soon after I came into office in August, I set out a first principles piece, which you can find through the website listed at the bottom of the screen. My principles for the way I'm approaching this role include focusing on people, being inclusive, consultative, and collaborative, trying to be honest, independent, and transparent in the way we're going to use the powers provided to the office, and being led by evidence. And those are the principles that animate how we're approaching development of this strategic plan. The first thing we need to think about is, what do we need to know in order to have a strategic plan? The key question, of course, is, what's the strategic goal? Where do we want to be at in our efforts to fight modern slavery in New South Wales at the end of the strategic plan? We're framing that in these terms. What should anti-slavery action in New South Wales look like by the end of 2025? And how do we get there? Now, to answer those questions, there are, of course, a lot of other questions we have to ask along the way, including, but not limited to, those you see on the screen. What modern slavery risks are there in New South Wales? Where does service provision fit in? Where do supply chains and portfolios fit in? How should the criminal justice system address modern slavery differently? What partnerships do we need to leverage the resources to achieve those goals? And also, of course, critically, how will anti-slavery efforts integrate survivor leadership? This is where all of you come in. In order to answer those questions, we need your input, your expertise, your visions, your commitment and passion. So we've set up a number of ways for you to help us. First, by being here today, you're already being part of the group that will go along this journey. Now, you can read and respond to the discussion paper on my website. You can send us a formal written response if you like, or if that's not thing and you'd rather just share some ideas or stories or fill out a survey, we're very pleased to announce that as of today, you can fill in a survey and share a story on the New South Wales Government's Have Your Say website at that link or at that QR code that you can see there on the screen. Please do encourage others to do the same. If you'd share the link and the QR code online through your socials, we really want to drive a broad consultation to understand people's perspectives on this issue in New South Wales and more broadly. Survivor engagement is going to be critical to understanding how we reach our shared strategic goals. So we've set up a number of dedicated survivor engagement channels. You can learn more about those through the website. Please reach out to me directly on anti-slavery at justice.newsouthwales.gov.au if you'd like to know more about that or any other aspect of the consultation process. I'm also pleased that we'll be holding a series of expert workshops with the support of the James Martin Institute for Public Policy in the weeks and months ahead. This is what you get to see and participate in if you have your say on the website that I just mentioned. And today we kick it all off. The idea today is just to get ideas out on the table, particularly around the question, what modern slavery risks are there in New South Wales? We want to hear your views on what those risks look like and begin to think about how we can address them together in the years ahead. We're not going to come up with the answers today. Maybe there will be a few seeds of answers, but today we want to get the ball rolling. We want to get ideas and discussion moving. So without further ado, we're going to turn over to the first of our speakers, and I'm very pleased to welcome Jane Crossling. Jane, if you'd take the microphone, I'll stay in the screen share because your slides will follow directly. Over to you. It seems that Jane cannot take the microphone. Jane, I don't know if you were able to accept the calendar invitation that we sent, but what we might do is, well, let me see if I can unmute you here. Could you try unmuting yourself now, Jane?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Apologies. Thanks everyone for bearing with us.
I think you
Over
also
to
blocked
you.
my camera as well, but that's not so super important.
That's a shame. Let
you
me
can
see if
hear
I
me.
can fix that.
Okay. Yes, it looks like I can. Yep, there I am. Hi.
Sorry about
Okay.
that. Please fire away.
That's okay. If you'd like to share the PowerPoint, I can give a really brief overview of, if we just want to move to slide 2, give an overview of the role that the Australian Federal Police plays in relation to human trafficking and modern slavery. So the Australian Federal Police is part of the whole of Australian government response to combat modern slavery. And we are working with the Attorney General's Department, who has the lead in relation to the National Action Plan. So there are a lot of projects that we're working on currently with various government partners, and we are obviously playing a key role. The Australian Federal Police, under the National Action Plan, national policing protocols, actually have the investigative lead when it comes to allegations and reports of human trafficking and modern slavery offences as they appear in the Commonwealth Criminal Code. So divisions 270 and 271 are where we take our lead from in relation to a raft of offences that we deem under the umbrella of human trafficking is the vernacular that we use in the AFP. The Human Trafficking Command within the AFP sits in Brisbane. I'm coming from the land of the Turrbal and the Yagara people today, and we have a national responsibility operating out of that Brisbane headquarters. Because of the unique aspects of the Australian Federal Police, we're able to bring to bear the international engagement as a result of having AFP members posted in 33 countries around the world. So that's very, very effective for us when it comes to that international nexus that a lot of our offending and our victims are dealing with. So we also offer a range of capability building initiatives as well, given our unique placement in the geopolitical space. The Australian Federal Police is also responsible for placing, after assessment, victims of all forms of human trafficking onto the federal government's Support for Trafficked Peoples program. That is administered by the Australian Red Cross. So only the AFP currently can do that. So we obviously play a key role in engaging with victims, making those assessments and ensuring that they are provided with all the help and support that they possibly need. We are also involved in a range of prevention and awareness raising initiatives. The key program is the Look a Little Deeper program, which we are rolling out to frontline workers across all states and territories. And that is a program all about indicators. So knowing the many, many forms that these types of offences can take so that we can drive reporting and ensure that victims are made safe as soon as possible. Might just move to slide number 3. Yes, so this is just a really high-level overview of the reports that have been received to the AFP for the last financial year. This represents a 31% increase in reporting from the previous financial year, and reporting didn't really slow down due to COVID. It just took different forms, and we're certainly really escalating in a lot of our reporting. You'll see the largest proportion of reports that we receive relate to forced marriage and also a range of sexual servitude. But certainly we have noticed over the last couple of years, even during COVID, the rise in the offence of exit trafficking. Certainly we have some concerns over. We might move to the next slide, slide 4. So for slide 4, this is the overall increase that we are seeing for reporting. So you'll see there, hopefully you can see that white line represents the 31% increase that I made mention of, to where we are tracking probably to increase that for this current financial year. And then the mauve line below represents reports that are specific to a victim in the New South Wales jurisdiction. So you'll see that is also on an upward trend, but maybe not as rapidly as the overall trend. And then for the next slide, thanks. So this is just a breakdown and a comparison of those reports further so that you can get a bit of a picture of what's happening in the state of New South Wales. So there are human trafficking specialist teams within the AFP in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And in every other jurisdiction, there are trained members who have experience in both doing the victim assessments and placing the victims on the program, as well as then subsequently investigating if that's the right approach to take. So you'll see here the blue bars are for New South Wales. It does give you a bit of a picture that certainly a large proportion of our reports for forced marriage are coming from the state of New South Wales, also coming from the state of Victoria as well. But certainly there's a strong level of representation, probably proportionate to the population and the diversity of the state of New South Wales. So that's a very, very high level overview of human trafficking within the Commonwealth construct and also in the state of New South Wales as well. And certainly after this presentation, we're more than happy to hear from any of the participants here today. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Jane. That's a really incredibly helpful overview and perspective on the Australian Federal Police role in responding to modern slavery risks in New South Wales today. What we're going to do now is hear from a number of speakers about sectoral and other risk factors around these risks in New South Wales. We've got a fantastic lineup of people. I'm going to dive straight in if the technology cooperates. Just bear with me here. Hopefully you will be able to see this and also hear the audio. Just please bear with me a moment. I suspect you cannot hear the audio. Please wait with me one moment. I'm going to skip Carsten Primdahl's video and we'll come back to that once we've sorted out the technical problems. Apologies. So our next speaker, I'm pleased to welcome, if we have him with us, is, I'm sorry, just getting used to these platforms. Do we have Josh Acow with us?
Yep, already.
Thanks, Josh. Great to have you with us. Over to you.
All right.
I'll try and get your video up too.
Oh, yeah. Cool. How's it going? All right. Okay, so I'll just give a quick presentation. I wasn't exactly sure what to write in this, but I thought I'd just kind of throw some information about, particularly around horticulture. So hi everyone, my name is Joshua Cow. I'm the risk manager at Oz Group, which is a cooperative based in the mid-north coast of New South Wales, or Coffs Harbour. Oz Group is a cooperative owned by its members, and at this point in time we have approximately 142 growers who supply berries to the supermarkets via marketing partners. Now, the berries that we supply to the supermarkets is raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries. Now, Oz Group have Oz Group growers would be considered tier 2 or tier 3 to the retailers. We have about 16% of our growers that are tier 2 and 84% are tier 3. Now, what usually happens is with berries, they need to be harvested by basically a human being. They can't really be harvested through mechanical means or anything like that. So basically, you need bodies on the ground to harvest them. One of the main problems is that these fruits need to be harvested pretty quickly and at a short harvest window. So the growers are usually kind of faced with an option to look at where they can get the labour from, and most commonly in the area that I work in, they would engage a labour hire contractor to supply those workers. Now, some farms range from different workers. You could be looking at up to 100 pickers on a farm, or 10 pickers, depending on how big the farm is. But there's actually a short harvest window, so it's that short time frame that growers don't really have an option but to get bodies on the ground to pick that fruit. What that also means is when they engage labour hire contractors, the labour hire contractors it would be fair to assume that some of these contractors could be part of criminal networks, and they could also be local contractors, as well as contractors that go through the harvest right between Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. Now, the main risk around modern slavery around these contractors would be, I suppose, debt bondage, deceptive recruiting for labour or services, and forced labour, of course. So that kind of paints a very quick picture of what the issues are around this area. And I think one of the biggest things that I think would be a step in the right direction would be having a labour hire scheme whether that's a state or a federal in place, to have those ability to kind of check who these contractors are and what they're doing, and whether they've got the right insurances and etc. There is also some social compliance audits available. So you've got Fair Farms and you've got SEDEX, but I think the industry sort of needs to do a bit more around not just relying on the audits to tell you what's going on the ground, but looking to see how the grower can do their due diligence around these labour hire contractors.
Thank you so much, Joshua. That's really incredibly helpful introduction to the issues that are arising in the horticulture sector today. I was very pleased to meet with you and others up at the Fair Farms conference in Coffs Harbour just 10 days ago, and to see the great work that's being done to try to put in place certification and other systems to address these risks, but clearly a lot more for us still to think about and to work together to address in the years ahead. So thanks for taking the time to be with us today, and for all that you're doing to raise and address these issues in the industry. All right, I'm going to have another crack now at going back to the video from Carsten Primdahl. Please bear with me. We'll give it another try here. We will attempt to. No, unfortunately, that's not cooperating. So we'll come on to our next speaker. The next speaker is Jeff Quinn. Jeff, are you with us? And if so, can you take the microphone and I will share your slides.
Yeah.
Perfect. G'day, Jeff.
How are you? Nice to see you
well.
again.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Right, I'm ready to roll with
There
my
we go.
slides.
Over to
Slide
you.
1. There's a historical. Go to slide 2. Yeah, slavery reform started in 1833, and with it also the Factory Act in 1833 regulating child labour. And as you can see there, kids under 9 were stopped from working, and kids over 9 to 13 worked a 9-hour day and a 12-hour day for children aged 13 to 18. Now in Australia today, many young people, migrant workers and young visitors are often victims of wage theft. Next slide, James. I think there's a slide in between, isn't there? No.
Not that I'm seeing.
No, that's all right. Now, 50 years later in New South Wales, children were still being exploited. Sir Henry Parkes introduced the Public Instruction Act. Rather than legislate child working hours, he put children into schools. So they had to go to education, and that set off what we might call 140 years of education reform in Australia to make us one of the best world's educated economies in the world. Next slide. Now, today there's two issues. We import goods from third world countries where people work in substandard conditions for low pay. Now, a question is that we have is, should we raise a moral bar? But within our own country, modern slavery takes a number of different forms: traducing workers' rights, coercive control, that may be taking a passport off a worker, and wage theft, sexual importuning. If they're working in the horticulture industry or the agriculture industry, women particularly, who form 54% of the workforce, have a 1 in 4 chance of sexual harassment. And then, as Josh explained earlier, the issue of Phoenix contractors. Next slide, James, please. Now, I set up my business after hosting young backpackers coming to Australia. who told me about endemic wage theft, sexual importuning and substandard accommodation. And I decided that there had to be a better way. My aim is that for young visitors, when they go home to their countries, they think and buy Australian because we treated them correctly. Now, there's 250,000 of these young people prior to the pandemic visit our country every year. Next slide. Now, it might interest you to know that in 2021, the Fair Work Ombudsman released their annual report the other day, and they recovered back paid wages and entitlements for a record of, as you can see, $500 million, 532 million. 384,000 workers were underpaid, and many of these were younger workers. And frequently the offenders are quite large corporations. Now, the title of my talk is Never Underestimate Young People, because the people who get most affected by wage theft and the sexual importuning that goes on in agricultural sector are basically young people who are optimistic and naive. And I think we should be treating them better. And I think we should be setting an example to the world. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great message and really helpful to understand how the experience of young people visiting and living in Australia and working in Australia today. Great to see that you're reaching out to them and doing your best to help them address these risks that they're confronting. So thank you for being part of the conversation, Jeff, and I hope we'll hear more from you as we develop this strategic plan in months ahead.
Pleased to help, James, and I fully endorse what Josh has said earlier.
Fantastic. Thanks for being with us. Our next speaker is Laura Vidal. Laura, welcome. I hope you two are able to access your microphone. Look at that. There you are on camera.
There I am.
Over
And
to you.
I don't have any slides, so I think we should be good to go. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura, and I am an independent consultant and final year doctoral candidate undertaking research on forced marriage in Australia. So I'm going to focus my comments today on forced marriage. So like most of what we know about modern slavery, forced marriage is not well understood. And what we do know comes from reported cases. However, it's been well established that what's indicated by reported cases is not indicated by cases that aren't being reported. So the nature of data being broadly limited to reporting can provide insights into general trends, but it is, however, suggestive of what needs to be developed and understood rather than what is already known. When I started my research 4 years ago, I set out to speak to young women, community members and service providers about forced marriage. But in doing so, what emerged really were rich accounts about the complexity of young women's lives. They talked about the context in which forced marriage occurs, which was an inexplicable interconnection between gender, the role of marriage and the relationship to family and community. This is important because the response to forced marriage in Australia to date has really been refined and limited to a criminal justice response. And what my work has found is that there's a mismatch between what it is that young women experience in context and how it is that then they seek redress for what is occurring to them. For example, the law and policy frameworks at the Commonwealth level limit access to support via the Support for Trafficked People program for individuals wishing to report or be assessed by the Australian Federal Police. And for many service providers who may be with us today, it's not surprising to you and to us that many individuals do not wish to report to the police and as a result are unable to access this pathway of support. That means really what happens is there's then a patchwork quilt, if you will, of other kinds of support, typically not-for-profit service providers, bringing together a response which is not always fit for purpose. Across the service continuum, people are making the best out of what's available, but it's typically retrofitted for other prescribed program areas like domestic and family violence, child protection and youth support. Beyond that, the legislative context is also challenging in that it remains that young women have to have been forced into a marriage really for that criminal justice process or the law in and of itself really to address the specific behaviours. So the technicalities of the law is probably more than we have time for today, but I raise that because what my research has shown is that for many individuals who are reporting to police, they've explained that they felt like they didn't have a choice and did it in order to access support, and it was seen as a gateway to support rather than the pursuit of criminal justice outcomes. And I think that's an important nuance that in developing emerging responses to forced marriage, we should be aware of. There's an opportunity in New South Wales to consider how an alternative pathway of support can be promoted so that access to support is not contingent on law enforcement reporting, in the same ways that access to other responses to interpersonal violence, like domestic and family violence, for example, isn't inherently connected with participation in a criminal justice process. I'll also just flag again, it's quite intricate and technical, that there are lots of overlaps with different areas of policy and law. For example, forced marriage is recognised in the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, which has specific objectives that states and territories have agreed to. And there are also intersections with current debates in New South Wales and other places around laws on coercive control. The familial context, specifically in the way in which forced marriage occurs, has been found in my research to be an overriding factor in the way in which young women make decisions. And they say overwhelmingly that they don't want anybody to get into trouble, they just don't want to get married. And there's been an increasing focus over recent years, particularly following some research I undertook in 2017 to recognise the role of families and communities in being part of a response to forced marriage. An example of this is currently being piloted by Good Shepherd Australia and New Zealand with a grant from the Commonwealth, where we are taking a model from Denmark to meaningfully, safely engage with families. We worked on that model over the last 6 months, and it's began accepting referrals at the beginning of October, and is just one example of the ways in which our increased understanding about the context in which forced marriage occurs can lead to emerging and different responses. The momentum to respond to modern slavery more generally in New South Wales is really an important opportunity to think through localised and place-based responses to forced marriage, particularly working with and understanding our states' communities and partnering with them to build evidence about what works in prevention and support, in my view, and supported by my research findings, would really propel the response to forced marriage forward. Like other approaches to addressing modern slavery, responses to forced marriage would also benefit from being developed alongside an impact and outcomes measurement framework. It's an emerging area of practice, and we need to document the evidence that can continue to drive our actions. Strategies then can continually be recast and adaptive in ways that ensure we're meeting the needs of affected individuals. So that's sort of the 101 snapshot, but happy to follow up on any of those more technical intricacies that we don't quite have enough time for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That's a hugely detailed and insightful introduction to a really critical area that often gets, frankly, a little overlooked, but perhaps in the mainstream media coverage. But as we saw from those, from that data from DS Crossling at the beginning, it's actually a critical part of the reported caseload here in Australia. I think your remarks are also really powerful in helping us understand that when we talk about risk, it's not quite the same thing as vulnerability. The way the institutions themselves work and interact with vulnerability, and indeed the strategies that perpetrators and exploiters use, risk sits at that nexus in the middle there between institutions, vulnerability, and exploiter strategies. And so we can affect risk not only by addressing vulnerability, but also thinking about how our own institutions respond and shape that risk context. Well, we look forward to engaging you further, Laura, in the weeks ahead and weeks and months, and best wishes for a successful outcome at the end of your doctoral process there.
Thank you very much.
All right, great to have you with us. Thank you. I'm going to come straight on now to David Cross. And David, if you have your presentation open, it may be easier for you to share, or I can do so from here if you prefer.
Yep, either one is absolutely fine.
Do you want to give it a whirl?
Yeah, sure. Let's play with the tech. Yeah, that's good. I will make it scroll. So let me just screen share this one. Or I'm not sure it's going to let me screen share, James.
Okay, that's all right.
Do you want to go with your one, and I'll just.
We're all learning the joys of Microsoft Teams today. As I said, institutions can be constraining and create unexpected risks.
No problem at all.
Here we go.
Yep, well done. You're doing great, buddy. Yeah, well done. Well, thank you, Dr. James. We appreciate your time and for collaborating in this and getting us all together, because this is really, really important. So we thank you for that. And also just a shout out and special thanks to Detective Superintendent Jane Cockayne, because the work of the AFP is absolutely brilliant and they're doing an incredible job both here in Australia and internationally. So I'm representing here as Australia, as Zoe Foundation Australia. So we're part of Zoe International, and we've been working in this area since 2002. So my background, for a lot of you, I haven't met you yet. I've spent the last 11.5 years in northern Thailand, working in that country. So our work in that space is in the prevention area. So speaking with different groups, from city schools to different community groups, ethnic minority groups. So we speak all over Thailand, talking about the human trafficking that police would a trafficker would use. And then over time, those programs have changed as technology has entered the country, and young people have cell phones and people can access them. So teaching children about things like internet safety and all those sorts of protection things. So we're currently working in 5 countries. So each of the countries that we work in, the issues have some overlap, but also some very unique cultural elements. So if you could go down to the next slide for me, that would be wonderful, James. Just thinking about some of what you're wanting to do within New South Wales. Apologies for the over colour there. The green means they're things that we currently feel like we could help support you with. The red is outside of our field. So I think there's other people on the call that have got more expertise with those. And the orange is areas that we're wanting more to step into. Our area is specifically looking at children. So that's our target audience. So anyone under 18 years of age. And so that's the work that we do. But as these working groups develop, I'd love to know how we can help, how we can support, and what we can do to help increase understanding and promoting the work that's a part of this focus group, and then think about ways that we can support what you guys are doing. So if we pop down to the next slide, that would be wonderful. If we're looking at numbers, we can debate how many people are in modern slavery in Australia as we think about this, and it goes through one particular area. If we look at forced commercial sexual exploitation, if you look at that global number and you applied it across into Australia, obviously the issue is completely different in each country. But if we're trying to get some broad metrics there, I guess what we're trying to understand as someone I've only been back working in Australia in this space for a year, just looking then, how is this happening as far as if there's that many people in modern slavery, how are children represented in those numbers, and how does that go through into the criminal justice system? Because we've had 2 convictions of trafficking in children in Australia, and then domestically, trying to just start to understand a little bit more about what does this look like domestically as well, and where are those children captured in the legal process. So we have a research proposal that we're currently working with someone at the Department of Prosecution, looking at case data, looking at cases that have gone through the judicial system, and trying to identify if there's other elements in there that would look that could also be considered as a child trafficking case. So that's a piece of research that we're currently undertaking. If you pop down to the next slide, thank you, James. A lot of the work that we're doing, if I go now to New South Wales, is that we really believe in equipping the next generation. So we have different curriculums that we've had available since 2014-15 for a curriculum that we have available for secondary school students. So we have these available. We have them on our site, and we speak at different conferences. We speak to teachers, and there's a beautiful way that this particular area sits within the syllabus in New South Wales. So New South Wales, the education has different to the national curriculum. So we have curriculums, we have things available for the national curriculum, then also specifically for New South Wales. So we have things that fit within geographies of human wellbeing, and then also geographies of interconnection. So as things progress in this group and we start thinking through other ways and things that we'd like to communicate with emerging generations, we probably have some channels set up that we could get information to teachers in New South Wales, and potentially we could write other curriculum that we could make available to help upskill the next generation, because I'm certainly not trying to build Zoe. What we want to do is this particular issue is going to take the effort of a lot of people. So if there's ways that we can be involved and we can help and we can support, human trafficking is a pretty significant issue. And so I'm really thankful to you, Dr. James, for putting this together, because I think collaboration is absolutely essential. And we've seen that with our work in different countries. So if I could have the next slide, please. 2 quick comments. Sorry, if we could go.
Have to wrap up fairly soon.
Yep, no problems. No, that's fine. No, all good. So thank you for your time, and if there's other things we can do to collaborate as we continue on, we'll be very happy to be involved. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for all you're doing, and let us know how we can help.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt there. We have a long list of speakers who are keen to be part of this conversation. As you said, David, collaboration is critical here. So it's fantastic to see the work you're doing, already thinking about syllabuses and so on. I'm sure there's a lot we can do there together, all of us, to think about how we reach those audiences, both the people who are vulnerable at a young age and the leaders of tomorrow. So thank you for everything you're doing. All right, we're going to move across now to issues around sexual exploitation and sex work. And we're going to begin with Carolyn Gowers from Project Respect. Great to have you with us, Carolyn. I think it's just you and your jazz hands today, right? No slides?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
No slides.
Over to you.
Great. Thanks, James. I first of all would like to pay my respects to the Bunurong Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land where I am today. And I'd also like to acknowledge the bravery and unique experiences of victim survivors of modern slavery and victim survivors of all types of violence who may be joining us today. So I'm the Executive Director of Project Respect. We're a non-faith-based, goal-oriented support and referral organisation for women and gender diverse people with experience in the sex industry and/or who have experienced trafficking for sexual exploitation. While we're situated in Victoria, our phone-based service is available Australia-wide, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And it's particularly exciting to see New South Wales leading the country in implementing a Modern Slavery Act that goes beyond supply chain reporting and recognises the role of an Anti-Slavery Commissioner. Central to the development of the strategic plan is the opportunity to build strategies and systems that work for people. While we're talking about risks, I would also like to talk about the opportunities in developing an approach that centres the needs of victim survivors and includes the following. First of all, the need for a gendered lens in the response and the strategy. This is in recognition of the high proportion of the victim survivors of modern slavery being women and girls. We know that gendered issues require consideration of gendered solutions. And for context, between 2009 and 17, 88% of the people the AFP referred to the Support for Trafficked People program were women and girls, 54% of whom were victim survivors of trafficking for sexual exploitation. 2, recognition of the long-term nature of trauma and developing responses that incorporate recovery and not just short-term interventions. This needs to include access to supports for victim survivors that are not contingent on their early agreement to engage with the federal police. We also need to provide victim survivors the time and space to process their experience and tell their story. We hear victim survivors who can feel their stories are invalidated when they're told too early in the telling that their experience doesn't fit a certain criteria. This itself is traumatizing and people will disengage from supports. 3, recognising coercion as the methodology of exploitation and addressing this in responses and prosecutions. We need to centre education around coercion as a key tool of the exploiter and build a system that's more responsive and brave when it comes to pursuing prosecutions. More importantly, we need to provide support and recognition of this as an experience for victim survivors. The current work on a nationally based approach to coercive control in the family violence context isn't yet considering what coercion looks like in a modern slavery context, including not considering the use of coercion in trafficking for sexual exploitation. There is an intersection here between modern slavery, family violence, and sexual violence that needs to be responded to and collaboratively find approaches that prioritises the victim survivor and proactively end the exploitative situations. Fourth, sustainable funding for services, supporting collaboration and options for victim survivors. The service system needs to be collaborative and funding needs to value the work of NGOs who support and work with victim survivors. There is value in a diverse set of providers that matches the diverse set of experiences. There's also value in what a provider is not, such as not being a government authority, and for the psychological safety of victim survivors being able to maintain this distance sufficiently to build trust so that the journey of recovery can commence. The funding of NGOs needs to not perpetuate through grant models and environment of competition with service providers trying to survive with little to no funding, which has the impact of keeping organisations small, busy on the wrong things, arguably, and the voices of the people that they're supporting less heard. And fifth and last, taking a big picture view on the drivers, blockers and vulnerabilities that leave gaps for exploitation. We need to break these down with systems work, which needs to be done to address visa instability, housing instability, relief from poverty, and avoidance of criminalisation of victim survivors. We need to continually refine approaches that recognise other needs, such as language and culture barriers, breaking down the ability of an exploiter to isolate, for example, in rural and regional areas, and the high reluctance of victim survivors to report through fear of authorities and fear of criminalisation. We need to stay current and responsive as exploitation shifts to where the gaps are. Those who seek to exploit will find loopholes in legislation and systems. If coercive methods are under-recognised and under-prosecuted, exploiters will rely heavily on coercion. And it's not an accident. Sadly, exploiters are self-educating on the methods of exploitation most effective to them. If we aren't recognising domestic trafficking without movement of people as an offence, this is another gap that will be exploited. We need to recognise that where multiple circumstances exist that increase the vulnerability of people, the spectrum of choice to circumstance to coercion leans in the direction of exploitation. Thanks, James.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was jam-packed in 5 minutes, huge amount of detail there. So I'd like to encourage you and others to give strong consideration to writing that up into a little written submission and responding to our discussion paper. You've got until the end of November. I know there's a lot of consultations. Then if you're writing something for another consultation, I don't know, perhaps the Commonwealth one, feel free to cross-reference in what you send us, but there's a huge amount of insight and learning there around gender, the revenue and support models for the industry, and so many other things you touched on. I really look forward to talking further with you and getting to know more from you about how we can all work together to address these risks and, as you rightly called out, these opportunities. So thank you for everything you brought to the table today. Staying now with the same topic area, but for another perspective, I'm going to turn the floor over to Jules Kim from Scarlet Alliance. Jules, are you with us and able to take the floor?
Yes, I'm with you, but it doesn't look like it's letting me turn my camera on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Let me see if I can figure out the camera, but why don't you make a start and we'll be keenly listening.
Thank you so much. So Scarlet Alliance is the Australian Sex Workers Association, and we're the peak national sex worker organisation across Australia. Our membership consists of individual sex workers and sex worker organisations. Sex industry owner-operators, even those that are sex workers, are explicitly excluded from our membership. Scarlet Alliance and our member organisations and projects have the highest level of contact with sex workers in their workplaces of any agency in Australia, government or non-government. Many of our member organisations, including SWAP New South Wales, who are also with us on this webinar today, have bilingual migrant outreach workers that interface with migrant sex workers every day in their workplaces, in brothels, massage parlours, in both the regulated and the unregulated sectors of the sex industry. Our work is also guided by our Migrant Sex Worker Advisory Committee. Sex workers don't have to be members in order to access our peer support or participate in our consultations. In this way, we represent not only our membership, but also those who are unable to have their name associated with sex work for the real fear of stigma and discrimination that exists in the sex industry. We aim to represent the actual experiences of migrant sex workers and other sex workers in the industry on this issue. And these are the people that are at the centre of this issue. And despite a number of the previous federal and state inquiries that have confirmed that trafficking is not a widespread phenomenon in the Australian sex industry, extensive policing and surveillance and compliance checking by various agencies, unsubstantiated claims of widespread organised crime infiltrating on the sex industry, and inflated estimates of numbers of trafficking are frequently used to push for more regulation and criminalisation of sex workers and our clients, and to take away the best practice model of decriminalisation. However, decriminalisation, which has been in place since 1995 in New South Wales, has delivered exceptional outcomes for sex workers. It enables effective peer outreach by allowing peer outreach workers access to sex industry workplaces, resulting in world-renowned low rates of bloodborne viruses and STIs, and a culture of workplace health and safety, and access to essential health and support services. It has not resulted in an increase in the size of the industry. It's a whole of government approach where a number of government authorities and agencies play a role in contributing to the effective regulations of different components of businesses, making for a transparent sex industry. It's resulted in reduced police corruption, and various government inquiries and investigations have been unable to find any evidence of widespread organised crime. And the outcomes are significant, cannot be assured under any alternative model. The Nordic model or the Swedish model that you might have heard about, or licensing, does not safeguard the rights and well-being of sex workers. These models have explicitly harmed sex workers and force us to take more risks to protect ourselves and our customers from being and to avoid detection by authorities. They penalise us for working or organising together and discriminate against us on the basis of our chosen occupation. They impede anti-trafficking efforts by creating disincentive for people who do experience exploitation to come forward in fear that police will prosecute or discriminate against them for working in the sex industry. Even though sex work is decriminalised in New South Wales, there is still widespread stigma and discrimination and racism, and continued barriers for sex workers in asserting their workplace rights and safety. But we cannot go back to a situation where sex workers are again targeted in order to deal with instances of workplace exploitation and when we do experience crimes against us. We cannot again conflate the issues of trafficking and workplace health and safety issues for sex workers. We cannot again return to a situation where sex workers are arrested, fined and deported, and our workplaces terrorised by police and immigration in the guise of rescue from slavery. When there are instances of workplace exploitation, it must be dealt with as an issue of workplace rights and deal with and respond to the issues that the sex worker identifies. It cannot result in the criminalisation, surveillance and harassment of the whole industry, creating disadvantage and barriers for all workers in the industry. People who experience acts of labour exploitation cannot bear the brunt of the response. Migrant sex workers need avenues for support that does not involve reporting to the police or participating in a criminal proceedings. We need greater access to legal and safe migration pathways to reduce the need to use agents or brokers to apply for extensive and complicated visa applications. Survivors of trafficking need access to a national compensation scheme. Currently, access to compensation is inadequate and greatly varies across the states and territories. All sex workers, but especially migrant sex workers, need equitable access to Australian justice mechanisms, arbitration processes, and industrial rights protections, akin to Australian citizens and akin to workers in other industries, without fear of arrest or deportation. Over-policing compliance checking of migrant sex workers in the guise of uncovering trafficking is inappropriate and ineffective. But on the other hand, peer education and community outreach are best practice interventions which help mitigate the social and cultural isolation experienced by migrant sex workers by providing information, avenues for support and referrals when needed. Migrant sex workers need the complete decriminalisation of the sex industry, as this means sex workers can access police and other justice support without fear of prosecution in the event of crime. Just last sentence here. Increasing regulation, policing and surveillance are not effective approaches for combating trafficking and exploitation. We need to shift to a comprehensive, multifaceted, evidence-based approach which supports culturally and linguistically appropriate sex work peer education and the decriminalisation of sex work, anti-discrimination protections and accessibility of civil remedies for those who experience labour exploitation for all workers, including sex workers and especially migrant sex workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules. Thanks for soldiering through that and maintaining your voice throughout. I'm sorry we couldn't get the camera to work for you on this occasion. Really appreciate the care and thought that went into that presentation. So many important points there. For those of you who don't know, I mentioned in my opening remarks, I published a little document soon after I came into office, my first principles. And Jules, I want to emphasize to you my commitment to an evidence-led approach and to an approach that puts people at the heart of policy outcomes and policy strategies. So I look forward to continuing to engage with you and Scarlet Alliance and your various affiliates and members and to learning and thinking with you about how we can ensure that that is the case for the people that you're representing and supporting. We're going to turn now to Hiroko Sawai from International Justice Mission. Hiroko, over to you.
Hello, my name is Hiroko Sawai. I'm with International Justice Mission Australia. And International Justice Mission, for those who don't know, is a global organization that protects people in poverty from violence. We have 29 program offices in 17 countries, and we work with local authorities to combat modern slavery, violence against women and children, and police abuse of power. And we work to rescue and restore victims, hold perpetrators accountable, and help strengthen public justice systems. There's two types of modern slavery risks that I would like to talk about if we have time. The first is the live stream child sexual abuse, or as it's called in the New South Wales Modern Slavery Act, cyber sex trafficking. Now, this is a horrendous form of human trafficking where children are sexually abused by traffickers who then live stream that exploitation to child sex offenders who pay to direct that abuse in real time. So IJM has been working since about 2011 to combat this form of human trafficking in the Philippines, which is considered the global hotspot. Children are trafficked by trusted adults, and they're often relatives, parents, neighbors. They're abused on camera by adults or forced to perform sexual acts on themselves or with other children. And the children tend to be very young. In more than half the cases, in IJM's cases, they were under 12 years old. And for each incidence of abuse, the payment is as low as $20. Now, the predators and traffickers use everyday social media platforms like Facebook, Skype, Google, WhatsApp to abuse the children. And for payment, they use ordinary money remittance services like Western Union or PayPal. This is a modern slavery risk for Australia and for New South Wales. According to both our data and the data of the Australian Federal Police, Australia is driving demand for live streaming child sexual abuse. So, and 18% of cases, IJM's cases in the Philippines involved Australian predators, and over 29% of rescues and 35% of arrests made in the Philippines since February of 2019 have been a direct result of a referral from the AFP, pointing to a significant proportion of Australian offenders. And at this point, I'd also like to call out the great work being done by the AFP in this space. We don't have statistics that are broken down by state or territory, but even just looking at a list that we've been keeping of cases that are cited in the media or in the AFP in the last year and a half of Australians convicted of live stream child sexual abuse, saw more than 70 people in New South Wales. Now, this form of trafficking is on the rise and is posing a serious risk to children around the world, not just in the Philippines. We've seen reports of cases in Ghana, Romania, Thailand, and other countries around the world. And according to Europol, the live stream of child sexual abuse has increased and has become more popular during the COVID-19 pandemic. So going forward, first of all, we need to ensure that there's greater public awareness of live streaming child sexual abuse. And because the nature of live streaming is ephemeral, this form of trafficking is very difficult to identify and detect. And so the technology industry really needs to be proactively working to detect and disrupt and report live stream child sexual abuse. And again, the E-Safety Commissioner has been doing quite a lot of work with technology companies on this, but more needs to be done. And victims should have access to damages or compensation wherever they are if they are being abused by Australian predators. And the other issue I'd like to talk about
in
very
just
quickly.
90 seconds, if that's all
Sure,
right, please,
sure.
Hiroko.
You know what, then I'll just stop here because I'm sure other people will talk about supply chain issues. Isabel.
All right, thank you. That's greatly appreciated that you're sharing some time back, but thank you for that extensive introduction to the really troubling issues around online sexual abuse. A lot of work for us to do there, and as you say, important work already going on, so we'll need to think carefully about how we interface effectively and add value to that work. Complexity here in Australia with our federal arrangements, we have to make sure what we're doing here in New South Wales complements and contributes to federal efforts and doesn't cut across things that are going on in other jurisdictions as well. Alison, I see you're next hitter up. I'm just going to try actually and share your colleague Karsten's video first, if that's all right with you. We're going to give that one more crack and see if I can get that to work this time around.
Hello, my name is Karsten Primdahl, and I'm from the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network and Anti-Slavery Task Force from the Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney. I'd like to address the risk of modern slavery in New South Wales for cleaning and security services. So let's get into it. The ACAN network, the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network, is rather large. We have 51 participating Catholic entities, and we have about 1,500 schools, 66 hospitals, approximately 250 aged care facilities, and 13 university campuses. As you can see from those numbers, we have thousands of sites, we have thousands of buildings, and as a natural result of that, we are quite a large consumer and procurer of cleaning and security services. It is not always easy to see exactly how and where we're spending the money on that, but we try to summarize our expenditure here in the table on the right-hand side. You can see that we have $49 million in cleaning and security services registered, but the guess is that some of the facilities management, property maintenance, linen laundry, and textile products also actually cleaning and security. And as is ICT hardware, because we have various different security systems and camera systems installed in different locations. So it's all a matter of where these expenses actually captured under the high risk categories. So this makes it a little bit difficult, but it's something that we're working on identifying. As you can probably understand from the numbers that we have, we are also very geographically dispersed all across the state. Of course, we have more facilities in Sydney and the larger cities on the East Coast, but we do have all over the state. And that means that we have very sort of diverse procurement function for getting these services in. At the same time, cleaning and security is a very decentralized type of industry. There's not a lot of consolidation and is very price sensitive or price driven. So we're trying to teach or train our network participants that they should not just go for the lowest cost, they should include other risk factors when they choose their suppliers for this. So this is something that we're trying to work on. It is not a secret that cleaning security is high risk. We all know that. So I'm not going to tell you why or what or how. But what we're doing in terms of cleaning is that one of the things we're doing is that, of course, we're educating our network participants, but we also signed up for a cleaning accountability framework membership. So we're part of the cleaning accountability framework now, and we're trying to take that across to our other participating entities so that they understand what's at stake. One of the ways also could be, instead of outsourcing this as a function, to actually insource it again and have the cleaner being a worker employed by each individual unit. In terms of security, we see a similar picture. It is it's usually outsourced, but we're trying to see whether there's ways that we could address these issues by perhaps insourcing part of it and working with our providers to make sure that they're not, employing the cheapest possible labor and passing on to us. What we quite often see, of course, also is that you want to drive the risk of modern slavery out of your own operations or your own sites. But then what happens? You install additional cameras or go for automations and efficiency gains, and then you end up with a system that might be manufactured or used in prison camps overseas to surveil various different population groups. So we have to be careful that we're not, shifting the risk from one area to another in the supply chain. We need to address both. We cannot just eradicate the risk on site and then live with having cameras that are used to supervise people who are being committed to human rights violations overseas. The key sticking point here is that with thousands of sites and thousands of buildings, we have a lot of legacy systems and systems from before this was an issue. And it's hard to retrofit. It's expensive to change all of it. We can't just rip it out. And it's hard to get one system component work with an existing system. So this is one of the areas that we're looking at. How do we phase that properly? So the key point is not to shift the risk. So I will leave it with that. Thank you.
All right. So there we have a nice introduction from Carsten to some of the risks in supply chains in New South Wales arising from modern slavery in cleaning and security services. I'm going to come now to you, Alison, and I think you're going to be talking to us about risks in textile supply chains. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And
are you able to share your screen there? It looks like you can.
Can you see it?
I can see it, but I don't know that others can.
Okay.
Getting a thumbs up. All right, over to you.
Oh.
Take it away.
Oh, all right. Okay. I'll stop there. Terrific. Oops. Hopefully I haven't mucked it up now. Where are we? That one. Hopefully that works. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, James. And as Carsten said, the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network, we have a risk management program that's been rolled out across over 50 different Catholic reporting entities. And building and construction is one of our high-risk areas, and how textiles fits into that is obviously carpet, soft furnishings, linen, and then you can also see uniforms as having around 30 million per annum spent on uniforms. So that covers both staff across hospitals, aged care facilities, but also what it doesn't take into account is the, I suppose, thousands that are spent by parents with 600,000 school students. That's a pretty hefty school uniform bill. So textiles are high risk for modern slavery. They're very price and time sensitive. Finishing is particularly high risk, so trims, embroidery. So what we need to be wary of, and what we're looking at is the school uniform crests, logos for staff uniforms, And it's high risk across the textile sector. Garment workers, garment factories are pretty used to being audited on an annual basis. Obviously, the country of manufacture, we've got high levels of inherent risk by the country of manufacture for forced labour, excessive work hours, and overtime. Uniform manufacturing is obviously quite different to fashion in that it really does have long, complicated supply chains. There's almost 3 separate supply chains just involved in the raw materials, the textile, and then the garment workers in the factory. Uniform design, the big difference is that you can't put it back on the rack if it doesn't fit or you don't like it. So the considerations that go into uniforms, which would be the same for, I'm assuming, New South Wales government procurement, also being high risk, would be all of the first responder uniforms and all of their specific technical needs like comfort, colours, sizing, and the various safety requirements. So the way that we're dealing with the risk is not to try and address everything all at the same time, but look at who made this and bringing the risk in closer to us. So what we've done is review suppliers in high-risk sectors, and then we're looking at basically sort of recommendations for particular sectors. So recommending that procurement teams and project management teams have a look at products, for example, made in Australia. So you might not be aware, but the carpet manufacturing sector is the largest remaining textile industry in Australia that's manufactured here in Australia. And these are some of the companies where you can certainly reduce the risk of modern slavery when you can visit the factory floor. You can know that the workforce profile. You can see that where the manufacturing, and in this case where the mill is as well. And the modern slavery statements by some of these carpet manufacturers are also providing great insight into the things like 55% of workers being covered by a collective agreement. So what that means is that the workers on the factory floor are actually earning, have better conditions than even the award. And I must say the Textile Clothing and Footwear Industry Award is really an excellent award for including protections for temporary migrant workers, particularly outhouse workers that are working in their homes, working for peace rates, but also covering all of those different textile sectors. So, and you can see here that less than 1% of some of the Australian carpet manufacturers there is less than 1% are temporary migrant workers. So you're looking at a workforce that is largely Australian-based, is very little subcontracting, very little outsourcing, and certainly that's one of the ways that we're looking at with the garment side of things as well, is looking at uniforms where there's Ethical Clothing Australia certified. So this is where the Textile Clothing and Footwear Union has a presence on site. They do provide that worker voice. They provide workplace inspections. They make sure that it's a safe and fair workplace, and they also reduce the risk of retaliation for raising workplace issues. So we're certainly keen to encourage one of the ways of reducing the risk of modern slavery in the textile procurement area is to look at which industries are covered by that award, whereas the union has a presence and where there's independent certification. That's all from me.
Thanks so much, Alison, for helping us understand the risks in textile and apparel supply chains. I'm going to try and come straight on now to your colleague, John McCarthy.
Hello,
Much appreciated.
I'm John McCarthy KC, Chair of the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network, known as ACAN. Today, I will speak briefly about the risk of modern slavery in New South Wales in the supply chains of hospital and aged care procurement. I will attempt to convey a short case study based on the experience of 18 Catholic entities involved in the hospital and aged care sector. The annual revenue of these entities is $13 billion. Procurement spend, $4.7 billion. Total high-risk spend is $3.1 billion. The largest areas of high-risk expenditure is on medical supplies, and then construction, and then 5 labour-related services spread across cleaning, security, waste management, and laundry. We would expect New South Wales health spend to be similar. Spend on medical supplies of $1 billion across 66 hospitals and 247 aged care facilities. The risk of modern slavery in the production of rubber gloves is well documented. Rubber is a high-risk commodity with evidence of forced labour in the logging of forests, planting rubber plantations, and harvesting rubber. All labour-intensive work undertaken by migrant labour, often exploited labour in countries like Malaysia. So what's the Catholic response to modern slavery in rubber glove manufacturing, as reported by the ABC recently? Ansell, one of the world's largest medical glove suppliers, has been taken to court in the US by 13 Bangladeshi workers. These workers are alleging forced labour, deceptive recruitment, and debt bondage in a Malaysian rubber glove factory called Brightway. Brightway was a supplier to Ansell, and the US laws will test whether Ansell is liable for the treatment of the Bangladeshi workers. We've been working together for 3 years to ensure ACAN health and aged care entities are best prepared to address this specific risk. One of the first steps was to ask everybody in ACAN to check if Ansell is a supplier. It turns out, yes, everyone is buying from Ansell. We also assume New South Wales Health is also an Ansell customer. Our next step was to bring together procurement people to discuss a response to the Ansell allegations. So instead of asking Ansell to have a dozen separate meetings, we just organised one meeting, and everyone who was input from our group was invited to hear what Ansell had to say. ACAN engagement with Ansell is ongoing and would greatly benefit from cooperation and collaboration with New South Wales Health Procurement. I will end on this note. We do not advocate any procurer making a decision to terminate a supplier's contract on the basis of a media report. Suppliers must be given an opportunity to respond to allegations and engage with their customers to improve the conditions of workers at the bottom of their supply chains. ACAN entities would welcome collaboration with New South Wales and other state health procurement teams on managing modern slavery risks. Together, our combined leverage would accelerate the end of modern slavery.
So thank you there to John McCarthy, KC, for a very interesting presentation on health supply chain risks and the considerable leverage that might be brought to bear to begin to address those risks. That presentation also helpfully points us towards response questions, but before we move on to them, I'm pleased that we're joined by Jan Kruger, who's going to share some thoughts on risks in corporate Australia. Jan, over to you.
Thank you, James. A pleasure to be here, and also just want to say it's an honour to be part of this group because such passionate speakers, which I've really enjoyed, and learning new things as I kind of get involved in this area as well. It's not particularly an area that I'm super familiar with in terms of modern slavery. However, what I wanted to talk about today was really around corporate Australia, like you said, James. So my name's Jan Kruger. I'm actually the Managing Director of Growth Wave. I've been in and around HR for over 15 years, mainly within the corporate sector, but I've also worked with government, non-for-profits, and overseas as well in the Philippines, Canada, and a few other locations. And it's an area of passion for me around human capability and getting the most out of people in an ethical and a sustainable way. And this is kind of the angle that I wanted to talk about today. And I'll try to use less than the 5 minutes because I know we're a little over time, James. So hopefully you can get a little bit of time back. But really, there's two angles. And this, again, comes down to my experience. And I think corporate Australia, you know, often we might come with this connotation of, well, they're paid really well. So surely this isn't an area of slavery in the traditional sense. But this is where I think the definition of modern slavery is really critical. So when I think about, you know, the kind of services that get offered from corporate Australia, and in particular, my experience has been in large status quo consulting houses, but also in financial services. So in particular, capital markets and trading firms like market makers. These organizations are in very profitable areas of the community. They're making millions and billions of dollars every year. Now, what I've seen firsthand and what I know speaking to a lot of people in these industries is there's a crisis in terms of how they're treating people. And so it kind of relates to a number of things that have already been talked about some of the other speakers. So while we might not be talking about sex slavery or the like, at least not that I know of, we do see a lot of coercion, a lot of leadership driven by fear and greed. And as a result, what we see is a number of bullying, harassment, and discrimination cases. And we're also seeing that increase. So on the positive, I'm buoyed by the fact that the government, both state and federal, are focusing more on how do we actually address some of these things through legislation. But also, I think it's really critical that each of us play a role in identifying and standing up and saying this is not okay. It doesn't matter how much money we're paying people. We need to make sure that we're treating people with the respect and dignity that they deserve as human beings. And that's what I think is lacking in a lot of corporate Australia today and indeed the world. So that sort of brings me to like the mental health element as well. So what we're seeing is increasing rates of mental health issues. So of course, that's not just corporate Australia, but there is a significant issue there. We've even seen in Sydney recently, a lot of people would know that somebody took their life in a big consulting house not too long ago. And the issue is not that particular consulting house alone. The issue is the system. The issue is the processes and the way that they're so profitable that I think the only way we can move things and move the needle is in corporate Australia to make sure that the dollars, so the customers, the clients, they're walking with their feet and talent is walking out the door. Talent is actually deciding, well, no, I'm not going to put up with that because we know there's a real drive and demand for talent in Australia and globally. And that is how we're really going to get change. So that's kind of what I'm here for today. I mean, I love to talk to people offline if anyone wants to reach out. Growth Wave is the company. My name again, Jan Kruger, and always happy to get involved. And James, again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Jan. Really important reminders there about the role that coercion can play in multiple different workplaces and the need to think beyond, you know, our preconceptions, challenge our own biases, and follow the evidence where it takes us to evidence of modern slavery and the risks of modern slavery. And that's a great segue now into the next tranche of speakers who are going to take us towards the end of this terrific webinar. Well, I think it's been terrific. I've learned a lot so far. And we're going to begin by thinking about how do we follow that evidence and identify risks and engage in prevention. And to get that conversation started, I'm going to turn to Professor Jennifer Byrne from University of Technology, Sydney. Many of you will know that Professor Byrne played a critical role in the evolution of this legislation and of this area over 20 years, and was the interim Anti-Slavery Commissioner during an interesting period of the legislation's development a couple of years ago. So I exist here in this role today thanks to work that Jennifer and others did, and Jennifer keeping the seat nice and warm several years ago. So great to have you with us, Jennifer. Looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, James. You're very generous. It's a pleasure to be here and to hear everyone speak today. Wonderful to get the expertise on the web. I've put my timer on, so I'm going to be really careful, James. So I'm from Anti-Slavery Australia at UTS. We have 4 main areas of work. One is we provide free legal advice to any person who has experienced modern slavery in Australia, and we are advising around 400 people currently, and that includes a focus on forced marriage. I'll put the links in the chat afterwards. We also do research and policy and education and training. And James, I recognise how hard it is to develop, a complex multi-year strategic plan, and I'm just going to focus my comments on 1 or 2 issues. Mindful that this is an enormous question, how to develop the plan. So I want to focus on access to justice, and in particular on survivor engagement. And I was very encouraged to hear your introductory comments about survivor engagement. And I'd like to refer very briefly to some newly released research that came out of UTS called Beyond Storytelling Towards Survivor-Informed Responses to Modern Slavery. And you can see the research on our website, and again, I'll put the link in the chat. Now, the research report was informed by interviews with survivors, survivor advocates, experts, quite a number of people who are on this call, and we drew best practice examples from both international and Australian contexts. And we showed through our research that survivors have unique knowledge and are well placed to contribute their expertise in multiple ways. And they should be given real opportunities to influence law and policy. They can advise government and engage in training of frontline government officers. They can design and co-design and present community education, but their contributions should not be tokenistic or add-on. Survivors should be recognised for their expertise, and they should receive appropriate payment for their skill and their knowledge. And I want to note that we have models for survivor engagement in the modern slavery area in New South Wales. So in particular, the Freedom Hub, the Salvation Army LEAP program, a new initiative at Anti-Slavery Australia, and a long-standing commitment at Scarlet Alliance for peer leadership. And I encourage engagement with all of these groups and with other models that have been created in the New South Wales context, particularly within the area of domestic and family violence. And carefully introduced. I want just to touch very briefly on the support framework, and I'd like to see a comprehensive New South Wales response to support for people who have experienced modern slavery, and a response that extends beyond the Support for Trafficked People program that we heard Jane Posling speak about so clearly earlier. We know that there are people within New South Wales who are fearful of engaging with the police or who may be ineligible to access the program. I'd like to see a way of providing a broader-based support. Finally, or almost finally, I want to recognise that slavery is not siloed. So there are multiple intersections between slavery and other forms of harm like family violence, forced marriage, dowry abuse, and forced labour. And it's going to be a huge challenge, I think, to ensure that we can develop a plan that is nuanced enough to be able to take into account these complexities. Finally, access to justice. It's really important that people get independent legal advice early on in a process. Anyone who's identified as a potential victim, I think, should be referred to independent legal advice. Reassures people about processes, gives people a process to access safety and security, navigate complex migration law, and get our victims compensation. Thanks for the opportunity, James.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that jam-packed presentation. Lot to grapple with and try to digest there. I'm just going to highlight one point, which is the one you started with around survivor engagement. To me, this is really a critical piece. We need to learn, and my office needs to consider carefully how to structure that engagement so that it is respectful, safe, and meaningful and sustainable over time, including the resourcing point that you made. We have already begun our engagement directly with survivors in this space on these issues and on the strategic plan itself, and we'll be reaching out to others in the next couple of days for dedicated engagement process. But I'd like to encourage all of you watching to get out your phones now and point them at that QR code that you see on the screen behind me on that side, I guess it is. That will take you, if you point your camera at that, it'll take you direct to the Have Your Say site where you can fill in the survey. And if you are a survivor or know a survivor and you're interested in filling out that survey, there's a lot of information there about how you can do that in a safe way. There is a special module embedded in the survey for survivors. It's entirely voluntary. The information that is shared there is entirely anonymous. You can pick your own username if you have to register for any component, and you can drop out at any time. If you have any concerns or would just frankly prefer to talk to a human, crazy idea in this day and age, please contact me or my colleague, Dr. Francis Morgan, on antislavery@justice.newsouthwales.gov.au. And we will be, as I said, actively engaging with Jennifer and others on this call to get your expertise and counsel on how we can do this in a meaningful way and ensure we're ourselves benefiting from the expertise that is available in that community. I want to come on now to Dr. Jamie Burrows, who's going to talk to us, I think, about identifying victims in health settings. One theme you'll hear from me over time as we go through this strategic planning process is we need to think about what capabilities we have across New South Wales to find victims and to find vulnerable people and prevent them becoming victimized people. And to me, thinking about healthcare settings, educational settings, community settings, multicultural engagement, these are all going to be critical conversations in the months and years ahead. So fantastic to have you with us, Dr. Burrows. You're, I think, in the ER business, so you must be very busy. We're really grateful for taking time and even preparing a presentation. Looks like you've got control of the system. Good luck. Over to you.
Thank you very much, James, for this opportunity. Yeah, my name's Jamie Burrows. I'm a doctor specialising in emergency medicine, currently working at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. I just want to thank Jenny Stanger for encouraging me to come up today and talk to you about a really crucial intersection that exists between modern slavery and emergency medicine. I'll just go on to the next slide there. Is that? Yes, so we'll just talk a little bit about, you know, why would a person in a situation of slavery attend the emergency department in particular? We're a 24/7 service. We're evident and accessible to everybody. No continued relationship is required for patients. They can dip in and out of the emergency required when they're in a crisis and when needed. We often see patients without identification, passports, Medicare and visa. And we do see disproportionately the marginalised people across the community. Research shows us, mainly in the US, but that the majority of people in situations of slavery are attending healthcare providers, and the majority of that is emergency departments. So between 60 and 90% of people, when they're actually in the situation of slavery, are coming to emergency departments. Just on to the next slide again. Sorry, I have to be fast on these slides. So the medical problems in consequences of slavery are well documented in the literature. In New South Wales, we have 3 million presentations per year to the emergency department. That's a lot of opportunity for face-to-face contact. Health consequences of slavery, we've got women's health issues, workplace injuries, infectious diseases, connected to poor living conditions, neglected chronic illnesses, mental health problems, and drug and alcohol. This is our bread and butter. This is what we see every day. So we know people in situations of modern slavery are attending the emergency department, and we know we see all the time the problems that come from modern slavery. So moving on, in the emergency department, we have the foundations to serve people in situations of slavery. We have a multidisciplinary team. We have psychiatry teams, women's health, trauma teams. We have on-call social worker and really engaged social workers on the ground. We already see patients with past experiences of trauma, and we're trying to improve our trauma-informed care of those patients. Patient care is our utmost priority. We know about mandatory reporting, and when we need to, with other patient situations, we have close communication lines with the police. So the bare foundations are there, but the fact is health professionals really lack knowledge in this area. So research in the NHS shows, between 70 and 90% of healthcare professionals have never had any proper education in this area, and they really lack knowledge on how to be able to identify this and manage it. So that moves on to the work that I've been doing in the next slide. Over the last few years, I've been working to do a usability study for screening process in the emergency department. We got the ethics approval 18 months ago. We've been waiting for COVID to settle down a little bit in the emergency department to have the capacity to run this out. But now is a good time. We're going to do it before the end of the year and hopefully have something published next year. One way to identify patients is very important to get the education running alongside to build capacity in the healthcare professionals so that our clinical acumen improves to be able to notice identification, red flags and indicators. But another way to identify patients in situations of slavery is to screen for it. And there's a screening tool approved in the US or validated in the US just last year. It's a 4-item screening tool. It's only 4 questions, but yet it has pretty good sensitivity and specificity, 89 and 74%. And we're running a multi-centre usability study, so it will be across RPA and Bankstown Lidcombe hospitals. And the main aim of this study for me is going to be to uncover any usability issues that you might come across in an emergency department when you screen for this or run this process through the ED. It's a really challenging environment. The ED, there's a lot of time constraints, competing emergency demands. So I want to see how can we best implement this? Can we find the private space to ask these questions in a dignified way? Can we separate the patient from the person that they're with? Can we refer to social work in a timely manner? Can we get interpreters involved when we need? Can we refer to community specialists when required? All of these usability issues is, it's important to iron that out first of all. So the hope is we can go to other emergency departments across New South Wales and further to say this is something we should be doing, and if you want to screen for this in your emergency department, these are the things that will make it better. I have sought advice from quite a few anti-slavery specialists in our community, Jenny Stanger, Rebecca Dominguez, Claudia Cummins, Sarah Morrison. Not only is this a first step that I think is important to pick this at-risk patient population, it's also been really valuable to learn from each other and open up those communication and referral lines between healthcare professionals like me and the other community services that are doing so much in this area already. So there's a lot of work to do in this area, but I'm hoping this is a first step towards really trying to serve the patients that we know are out there and they are coming to the emergency department.
That's hugely exciting, Dr. Burrows. Congratulations on getting that complex study and work so far, and best wishes for its future in months ahead. We'll be really keen to see the results of that and to support you in any way we can. We know from the Australian Institute of Criminology's work that about 20% of cases in Australia are reported. And we know that's primarily through criminal justice mechanisms. So there's 80% of people suffering modern slavery in Australia today that we just aren't getting to. We aren't finding, we aren't supporting in the way that we should. So we have to think outside the box. We have to think about these kinds of approaches to identification. We have to think about user experience, frankly. If you are someone suffering or vulnerable to modern slavery, what kind of user experience are you going to have across government more broadly when you come forward? How do we make that an experience that you actually want to participate in? We know, for example, that migrants, when they're victimized in the workplace, around 91% of those who have their wages stolen don't report. They suffer in silence. That's according to research from Laurie Berg and Bettina Farbenblum at UTS and UNSW in the Migrant Justice Resource Initiative. I may have that name wrong. Apologies, Laurie and Bettina, if I do. You can find it. So we have to think about these avenues for finding and helping people. So really credit to you, Dr. Burrows, for pioneering this work. And please do remain in touch with us and let us know if there's anything at all we can do to support this as we go forward.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Pleasure
to have you with us. We're going to come on now to think about another critical capability and resource in finding people who are vulnerable where they are, and that is, of course, worker engagement. So, Georgia, there you are, right on time. Thank you for taking time out also from your many family and work demands to be with us today. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. I am going to try and keep this to 2 minutes because I'm very conscious of time. My name is Georgia Potter-Butler. I work for the United Workers Union. I'm the National Campaign Coordinator in Property Services. So our union is incredibly broad. It looks after farm workers, aged care workers, disability workers, cleaners, security guards, casino workers, early childhood educators, people who work in warehouses, all sorts of things. But I specifically look after cleaners and security guards, who are obviously very vulnerable industries when it comes to modern slavery. I just wanted to talk a little bit about unions as allies in addressing modern slavery. And I wanted to think about that in 2 ways. One, unions are frontline workers. So union members are frontline workers. They are the doctors, nurses, teachers. And so when thinking about how we work with frontline workers and the identification of potential victim survivors, I think it's worth thinking about the institutions that they belong to that can partner with organisations to do education about how to identify and address modern slavery. We have relationships of trust with our members, which means that we're able to convey information to them and support them in building new skills that may assist in addressing modern slavery, particularly those points where survivor victims come in touch with the health system or the education system, disability care workers, that kind of thing. Also, institutionally, obviously, we do what is classically termed as worker engagement in this space, but what we would just call organising. So we are out there on the front lines dealing with working with often very vulnerable workers to identify what their working experience is, and particularly in industries that I organise, often that is experiences of exploitation, not just work exploitation, but lots of different nexus of exploitation. And we work, I call it a peer-based approach. We work on the basis that the best people to talk to cleaners are cleaners. The best people to talk to security guards are security guards. So the people that we employ to go out and do that engagement and are often off the floor. So they used to be cleaners, they used to be security guards. They come from the language areas that and the ethnicities that make up those sectors. And they are specifically trained on using a framework that is predicated on the importance of building trust in order to get any kind of disclosure. So what we are seeing within our supply chains is a lot of these big corporates are really into their reporting obligations around modern slavery, particularly with regard to the Federal Act. But the way that they are framing and thinking about worker engagement ignores the importance of power and hierarchies within that. And so they will often get managers to do interviews with potentially vulnerable workers or people within the supply chain, or external people, but people who are seen as being contracted to power within that supply chain. And that's problematic because it doesn't enable trust, and trust is one of the kind of foundational things in any kind of disclosure, whether that disclosure tips to the point of modern slavery or not. So we are seeing people make these gestures towards worker engagement, but they're ignoring the importance of power, and they're also ignoring the importance of education. So in order to identify that you are being exploited, you need to understand what exploitations are and be educated around your rights. And often that step is skipped. So there will be a 1-800 number created so that you can self-report your own exploitation, but those aren't used that frequently because people don't feel safe in that process, and they don't necessarily self-identify as being exploited, and they don't have trust or a relationship with whoever they're working with. So unions work on a basis, an organizing model that emphasizes building relationships and trust, doing education, and then moving to a point of action. And I think that unions in all sorts of different industries can be allies in addressing modern slavery and working to identify potential victim survivors, but also seeking to address issues that don't quite hit what would be classically framed as modern slavery, but are definitely exploitation. And often when you set up a pure reporting line that has criteria for what modern slavery is, in the engagement with potential victim survivors, exploitation is identified, but because it doesn't hit that particular level, it's not seen as something that can be institutionally addressed, or not seen as something that needs to be institutionally addressed. And that is kind of where our expertise sits, is that sub-modern slavery level, where you're talking about forced labour and that kind of unpaid wages, that kind of thing. So, and we also have relationships internationally. So it's not just about workers on the ground here in New South Wales, but we have relationships with unions internationally. And so we are in a position to assist organisations like those on this call, but also you, James, in identifying, when we're looking at the supply chains, who are we best placed to get in touch with in terms of workers within those supply chains. But I'm going to jump because my baby's losing it and we're running behind time. But
you have a junior delegate clamoring for your attention. Yeah, Thank you, Georgia. There's a huge amount to think about there. Trust is absolutely critical. So we'll look forward to engaging you again in the future. Think about how we can engender that. Thank you. Great segue though there from Georgia to our next speaker, Julie Pettigrew from Electronics Watch, to think about how we address some of these issues around worker engagement given the cross-border nature of supply chains that many of us here in New South Wales are grappling with. So on that, over to you, Julie. Oh, let me say one thing before I turn over, Julie. We're going to go beyond time. Let's just call it now. So my best guess, looking at the list, there's currently 7 more people to come. My best guess is we'll be wrapping up in about 35, 37 minutes from now. Hope you can all stay on. If not, the recording will be on the website in days or weeks ahead. You'll be able to watch anything you missed there. Thanks for being with us. But Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much, James. Thanks to yourself and the ASC team for convening this really important workshop. And I'm coming to you from Jindabarra country in the Sunshine Coast hinterland. So Electronics Watch, what we do is we actually bring together the public sector buyers and civil society organisations in the electronics production regions, and we work with experts in human rights and global supply chains to do this. We guide public procurement demand for decent working conditions in the ICT electronics supply chains. And we like to think we provide unparalleled capacity for public buyers to follow up on contractual demands. So there's basically three main steps to the model that we implement, that public buyers, when they become affiliates with us, what happens. So they demand decent working conditions in their contracts. The Electronics Watch, we provide them with the clauses for affiliates to adopt or, adapt for their use at the outset of the tender process. We offer affiliates the option of monitoring for compliance through us, and the intent is to work on improvements collaboratively, to effect continuous improvements throughout all tiers of the ICT supply chain. We work from mining all the way through the electronics supply chain. This requires that all electronic supply chains connected to public procurement from mining to manufacturing include public buyers exercising their social responsibility and making a tangible, measurable, positive impact for workers that make the goods that they buy. You're probably all aware ICT is incredibly high risk, both in terms of the sector, but also geographically. No one that's on this call today that has electronic equipment is, we're all involved in modern slavery in this supply chain. We all utilise the products that it produces. We enable civil society organisations and democratic trade unions, emphasis on the democratic in some of the countries we speak of, in production regions, accessing industrial zones and workplaces to support the workers in attaining their rights. And we work towards the employers complying fully with all applicable domestic, international labour rights and safety standards. In terms of affiliates, we have affiliates around the globe. Electronics Watch is actually a European organisation. I am their Australian representative. In Australia, we have Curtin University, the University of New South Wales and Monash University. We've also done some work with the Australian government as well, but we've got affiliates in Belgium, Germany, France. International organisations such as the OSCE are affiliated with us. Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK as well. Our monitoring partners that we work with, and we train them up in our methodology. We're running across about 18 monitoring partners across quite diverse regions: Hungary, Taiwan, Bolivia, DRC, China, of course, Indonesia, Philippines, and we're constantly expanding the areas that and Czechia as well. We utilise worker-driven monitoring, so in keeping with our previous speaker, we insist upon the active involvement of the workers, and we find that using the monitoring partners that we work with, because they're locally based, they speak the language, often they already have a relationship with the workers, and I found Dr. Burrows's presentation absolutely fascinating, because I think that's another area absolutely where we can pick up on victims or survivors of modern slavery. So our monitoring partners, we meet off-site, on-site, we work with the workers about remediation, we make sure it's informed, it's safe, but it's worker-driven transparency that's really important, and it has to be based on trust. That is essential. And I'm going to try and speed this up, so just a couple more.
Just one more minute, I'm afraid, Julie.
No problems at all. So the types of forced labour we see in the ICT supply chain are forced student internships, which is something that we don't hear of very often, restrictions on right to resign, forced overtime, recruitment fees, identity documents being taken, and also toxic chemicals are a big one for us as well. So I'd recommend increase supply chain transparency, develop internal strategy and capacity, monitor forced labour risks independently, drive meaningful remediation, always try and support freedom of association and the right to collectively bargain, and have your workers involved in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'll come straight over now to our next speaker, Lina Garcia Daza from the Red Cross.
Thank you, James, and thank you everyone for staying today. As James said, I'm Lina Garcia. I'm the lead for trafficking, forced labour and forced marriage in the Australian Red Cross. As the majority of you will know, as part of a strategic priority number 3 of the National Action Plan to combat modern slavery, Red Cross delivers the Support for Trafficked People program. The program is funded by the Australian government, and Red Cross has delivered this program for the past 12 years. As part of this program, we provide a complex casework service across the entire country in all the states and territories. And we have a client-centered approach, which means that the needs, the goals, and the aspirations are identified together with the individual. And based on those needs, goals, and aspirations, we support them to make informed decisions and identify the supports that are needed. The type of support provided varies depending on those needs and goals, as I was mentioning before, but can include, among other things, if you can go to the next slide, please. It can include, next one. Thanks. It can include, as you can see on the slide, accommodation, financial support, emotional support, referrals to legal and migration services, referral to employment services, access to social services, education, and training. Next slide, please. So we have supported more than 573 people in Australia. Trends have definitely changed over the years, but together with Victoria, New South Wales is the state that has received the highest number of referrals throughout the years and is currently with the highest number of clients being supported. 36% of the total number of clients ever supported through the STPP reside in New South Wales at the time of referral, and 42% of clients currently being supported are located in New South Wales. Primary type of exploitations, as you can see in the screen, like I'm very mindful of time, so I'm trying to speed it up. Primary type of exploitation includes deceptive recruiting, exit trafficking, forced labor, and forced marriage. Next slide, please. Through our support, perfect. Through our support, we have seen multiple impediments for survivors to seek support and advice that in turn constitute an ongoing risk of modern slavery. This slide summarizes some of the main impediments. I will classify them into 2 main groups: fear, as some of the other speakers have already spoke about, and lack of knowledge and understanding about how to find indicators and where to seek advice and support. When we talk about fear, usually victims and survivors overwhelmingly hold fear towards institutions of authority, not only the police, but any agency that is related to government authority. The reasons why a survivor may fear authority are endless, but include, among other things, negative experiences with authorities, fear of retribution, fear of shame or stigma, fear of consequences of insecure or unknown immigration status, fear of losing employment, fear of not being believed, and fear of experiencing further harm due to a distrust of authorities. As other speakers have already mentioned, currently the only pathway for a victim survivor of trafficking to access the STPP, or the Support for Trafficked People program, is through the referral from the Australian Federal Police. This, together with the fear of authorities, plays as an enormous barrier for identification and for accessing appropriate supports for people who may be fearful or reluctant to accessing appropriate supports. Red Cross strongly believes that an additional referral pathway to the support program has enormous potential to increase visibility of victims and survivors and supports offered to them, and have a positive effect on prosecutions of trafficking and modern slavery. As Jennifer previously mentioned, we really want to see an alternative for people to access tailored and appropriate support. In terms of lack of knowledge and understanding, we recently conducted a survey to migrants on temporary visas or no visas, and we received a total number of valid responses of 93. Of these, 40% did not know how to find information on their rights and entitlements in Australia. 52% did not know how to seek support and where to report. And 62% of people did not know where to contact for help and advice. From the 38% that knew where to go, only 10% responded they would contact the police or AFP. So as you can see, raising awareness needs to come together with building trust and confidence in the system, trust and confidence in the mechanisms to seek for help and support, in the mechanisms to report and the positive impact it may have. When responders were asked about their level of confidence in contacting different agencies, 38% were not confident or not sure to contact the Fair Work Ombudsman. 43% were not confident or not sure to contact local police, and 54% were not confident or not sure to contact the AFP. This really represents a lack of trust in the system and the need to create not only awareness, but really to create trust, to build trust on the system and the reporting mechanisms. We welcome all the effort and work that the government and civil society organizations have been putting in addressing modern slavery, and look forward in continue working with you all in building this trust that is needed in the system, recognizing survivors for their expertise, knowledge, and be driven by evidence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. Really important points there. Some interesting resonances with some of the things we've been hearing from other speakers today. I'll look forward to continued engagement with you and the Red Cross as we work through some of these issues in the months ahead. In the interest of time, I'm going to come on straight to our next speaker, Anna Ruth from Freedom from Humanity. Are you with us, Anna? Yes. Can you take the microphone? I think you may be muted, Anna.
Hello?
Yes, there you are. We can hear you. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening there with Anna. We'll come back to Anna a little later. We'll come now to Carolyn Kitto, please.
Okay.
Over to you, Carolyn.
Okay, hold on. Am I able to share screen, James, or not?
I can see what you're showing, and I'm hopeful others can. So why don't you plow on, and they'll let us know if that's not the case.
Okay, all right. What I wanted to really share today is about the importance of how we work together. And I want you to imagine a stuffy room in the south of India. And in that room are people who don't normally get into the same room as each other. And over 4 years of work, we have gathered these people together to have a conversation about how we end the Sumangali scheme, a forced labour scheme involving young women in spinning, weaving and dyeing factories. So this model has been developed out of that experience. It's also been developed out of our experience in working with the chocolate industry, with PPE and rubber gloves, in seafood, tea, and a number of other industries. So we take the approach that there are at least 5 clusters of people that need to address modern slavery for us to tackle the problem. There's government, there's consumers, campaigners and media, NGOs, academics and unions, farmers, workers, local voices and communities, businesses and auditors and investors. And each of them has their own role. And in fact, knowing what the role of each is incredibly important, because as we would all know, if you decide that the role of NGOs is to build infrastructure when it really should be the government role, as soon as the NGO leaves, the infrastructure falls down. So we've been working on this approach of understanding roles, but also of understanding how each of these informs each other. So how does business inform government? How do workers inform government, survivors, NGOs, campaigners, and consumers to do its job that it needs to do? And we would see that around that there's importance in services, infrastructure, legislation, enforcement of laws, ratification of international protocols, and ensuring service provision as a base. So it's then how does each of these help the other? Then the next question is, and what is the co-accountability? If we are going to address this issue together, we actually need to be accountable to each other in a way that means that our focus is not just simply on building our own institutions or organisations, but that our focus is on ending modern slavery. And we need each of these sectors to be involved in that particular process to make sure that happens. So I think I did less than 5 minutes, James. So back to you.
Very impressive, Carolyn, but a lot in that 3 or 4 minutes for us to work through in the months ahead, I think, as we think about the critical role of how we're actually going to achieve system change. You'll hear me say many times in the future, modern slavery is a system failure. So we have to change the system. And you can only do that if you have all the different parts of the system working to the same common outcome. Yep. So thanks for setting that out so clearly. I'm going to try and come back now to you, Anna Ruth. Let's see if we can get your microphone working. It says it's working on my side. There we are. Give it a whirl.
Fantastic. Thank you for your patience. I wondered if I have a slide. I think it's perfect, amazing. Yeah, so thanks, James, for the opportunity today to speak. So I'm the founder of Freedom for Humanity. Next slide, please. So we thought slavery was abolished in the 19th century. So we know that it's gone far worse than it's ever been before. Next slide, please. So as you all know, in 2016, according to Global Slavery Index, it was just shy of 40 million. Next slide, please. And in 6 years, that number's gone up by 25% to 10 million, according to the ABC that was featured about a month ago. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So here, next slide, please. Here, our vision is to create a world free of human trafficking and modern slavery. And our mission is to breaking slavery with education. And I realized I couldn't do this by myself. So I reached out to my network and was able to put together a team. As you can see, there's corporates who care about this issue. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly go through some issues. Next slide, please. So about a month ago, I was giving an example. I was invited to a short film premiere at the Event Cinema in Castle Hill, and it was designed for the police force. So it's not actually for the public. And this particular film made me realize about the dowry abuse. And to my shock, in the short film, women were actually having to not only pay money and assets to the groom's family. So they were not only, isolated abuse, but some of them have committed suicide. And one of the father, at the end of the presentation, a father spoke out and said that her daughter, who was educated here in Australia, took her own life because she didn't want to bring shame to the family. And the film was made in Blacktown and Kellyville, here in New South Wales. So this is an example of forced marriage, debt bondage, servitude, and slavery. So this gives you a bit of understanding the whole big picture, modern slavery with the different categories. Next slide, please. Next. As you know, 71% are women and 1 in 4 victims are children. Next slide, please. And I thought it was a $40 to $45 billion industry, but to my shock, it's actually $150 billion. Next slide, please. To compare that to a country, it would sit at approximately rank 56 in the world, where Hungary sits at 140 billion. And that number in the last 6 years would have gone up by 100 to 100, maybe 180 to $100 billion. So we can see how big this problem is. Next slide, please. So what's the solution? Next slide, please. My team and I, we hosted a Modern Slavery Online Summit in June this year. We had 21 speakers, including the Australian Border Force, New South Wales Police, speakers from UK, US, Hong Kong, and of course, Australia, to not only to create awareness, but to also to educate corporates to comply to the Modern Slavery Act. Next slide, please. So our goal, as I mentioned, we want to focus on scholarship programs for survivors of human trafficking, because I believe the key to freedom is education, to break that cycle, allow them to have a better option. Once they finish their studies, we can then assist them with internships with companies like Apple, Tesla, whatever. So it gives them a better option. Next slide, please. So at Freedom of Humanity, we're trying to, we can only do this with your help. Next slide, please. So we actually are raising a fundraising. We're actually a cocktail event on November the 3rd, next Thursday at Deloitte in Parramatta. We're supported by Community Migrant Resource Centre, as well as the Western Sydney Community Forum. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. So here are some details that you can reach out to us and how we can collaborate. We've got LinkedIn, Facebook, and there's a QR code for more information on next week's event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Great to see this community action to address these really critical issues. To stay on that theme, I'm going to come across now to Sai from Rotary. Sai, I think we have some slides for you. Is that correct?
That's correct. Can you hear me, James?
Yes, I can hear you. We can't see you yet. Let me
Perfect.
have a look whether I can. It looks like it's on your side that you'll have to fix that.
Yep. Can you see me now?
Yes. Welcome. Yep. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Let me find those slides of yours. 1 second.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yes, that has come up.
Great.
Well, thank you for having me, James, and for everyone that's attended this meeting. I'm representing the Rotary Action Group Against Slavery called RAGIS. I'm the chair for the task force here in Australia. Let's move on to the next slide, please, James. For those that don't know who Rotary International, if you want to just do the next click. We're established in 1905, so the support of Rotary International with a current global network of 1.4 million members and 46,000 clubs across 200 countries. This is where we unite and take action to create lasting changes across the globe in our communities and also within ourselves. More importantly, that we're focusing now on the state of New South Wales. If we go on to the next slide, James. And there are approximately 30,000 Rotarians here in Australia. Our mission is really committed to connecting, empowering, and equipping our Rotarians to engage the communities and eradicate all forms of modern slavery and trafficking in New South Wales and across the country. Right now, there's about 50 district clubs just in New South Wales alone. This is what we do. We aim to support the New South Wales Anti-slavery Commissioner's functions, orientation, and first principles by addressing our New South Wales district clubs, local Rotarians, and their communities. How we do it? We have developed a community awareness and prevention education plan called CAPE, which we equip and empower Rotarians members to execute local CAPE projects in their communities. As a task force, we assist members to connect with other like-minded Rotarians, and this way take action to end human trafficking and modern slavery. Next slide, please. And why we do it? Freedom is a basic human right. We believe that collectively we have a shared responsibility to take action on our world's most persistent issue, because New South Wales, Australia should be free of modern slavery and human trafficking. Our members, our clubs and districts will continue to work together so that we can raise awareness and educate their communities in this cause. So the Rotary Action Group Against Slavery was officially recognized in 2013. We recently established the task force in New South Wales this month, and it allows us to have full access to all the Rotary district clubs, members, and also stakeholders across Australia. Now, this is just a very short preview. I won't go through all of them, but we are talking with advisors in technology. Memberships is one of the things that we're looking at increasing, plus the movement that we're doing as part of RAGIS. In New South Wales, we have an ambassador and coordinator that will be looking after all the memberships and as well as presenting to all the Rotary clubs. In our first 12 months, we're looking at increasing these numbers, and our annual targets is to ensure that all the information that we're receiving from the Commissioner's office will be sent across to all the district clubs. So just one more click there, James. So as Rotary members, we have we've played a proven key role in bringing the world to the brink of polio eradication. And for those that are not sure, we have been in 200 plus countries, 122 of those we've ended polio through the membership of Rotary. And it'll be the same key role in activating a network of 1.4 million Rotarians globally to take action against human trafficking in all its forms at a local level. So thank you for your time, and thank you once again, James, for allowing us the opportunity to present RAGIS to you.
Not at all, Si. Thank you for your patience and sticking around to share that with us. What a wonderful set of capabilities you're bringing to the table. That's just tremendous to see your commitment and engagement and this ambition of repeating Rotary's fabulous contribution to eradicating polio, in eradicating what is sometimes called an epidemic of modern slavery, is just a fabulous ambition for us to have on the table as we begin to think through a strategic plan. So thank you, and please thank your task force members, and we'll look forward to engaging you in the weeks and months ahead as we think about how we can take you up on that wonderful invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James.
All right, we have 2 speakers to go. So bear with me. They're both also going to challenge me technologically, but I will do my best. The next speaker is Robin Mellon, and Robin is joining us by video. Let me just line this up.
My name is Robin Mellon. I'm the CEO of Better Sydney, the project manager for the Property Council of Australia's Modern Slavery Working Group and Supplier Platform. And I have the privilege of working on sustainability, human rights and modern slavery initiatives across 13 different sectors at the moment around New South Wales and across Australia. So I'm sorry I can't join you live, but happy to provide a few thoughts for this webinar. On the topic of risks, of course, there are specific sector risks around things like cleaning, security, the finishing trades within property and construction, things like tiling and painting and plastering. But of course, we need to look at agricultural workers, at fruit pickers and manual labourers across different industries. And we need to look at roles with higher degrees of labour intensity, higher numbers of migrant or visa holding workers, or even workforces with a lack of gender or cultural diversity. There are many people with amazing data on these risks who can explain them better than I can. The point that I want to make is that we need to regularly come back to those emerging and rapidly evolving risks like forced labour in renewable energy solutions, PPE, so single-use gloves, face masks, or clothing and uniforms, because many of the risk assessments that I've seen recently are not only past tense, so looking at issues that happened last year or even some time ago, but they're sporadic. So last year we found out that X was happening and we're going to base everything off that. Whereas we've seen that, through COVID, through the invasion of Ukraine, through Brexit, we can see how fast these supply chains move. So that risk assessment needs to stay up to date. They need to be regular and they need to be varying in approach. Another risk that I want to call out is our own unconscious biases. We believe that slavery is found in supply chain X, in companies of size Y, with whom our annual spend is over Z. Whereas we probably need to be looking at some of the smaller and medium-sized organizations as well, with whom spend is irregular and possibly lower, and we need to be randomizing our assessments, audits, and checks as well. On top of the high risks that we can work out, we need to do some random assessments, audits, and checks to overcome some of these biases. Now, one of the other biggest risks I can see at the moment is the emerging disconnect between human rights and modern slavery professionals, particularly in the language used and the communications, and the people that they're trying to communicate with. Grievance mechanisms, rights holders, remediation. The people in this webinar understand these terms, but do our neighbours, do our clients, do our suppliers? So there is an inherent risk in assuming that people know what on earth we're talking about. I've encountered this across the sustainability arena over the last few decades. If we think that people are going to get excited about net zero, we may be making things difficult for ourselves. But if we talk about greater comfort, lower bills, and better for the planet, it's hard to disagree with that. Likewise, the risk is that we try to engage with people and organizations using the wrong language and give them recommendations rather than bounded choices. Which of these three approaches works better for you, your organization, and the people in your supply chains is much more likely to get engagement. Now that brings me, of course, to education. It's an area of passion for me. There is a lot of great material out there already. Well done to the Supply Chain Sustainability School, Anti-Slavery Australia, the Modern Slavery Register and Business Engagement Team, Be Slavery Free, and many, many other organizations for creating resources, videos, posters, guides, modules, and everything else, often on the smell of an oily rag. But we need to bring all of this together, recognize how many similarities there are across sectors, stop reinventing the wheel, and start sharing resources better so that we can fill gaps, not repeat content. So to address the risks in New South Wales perhaps means doing an audit, an assessment of free learning resources across different media, working out what's most relevant, promoting that, and filling the skills gaps for New South Wales organisations and individuals. Now that's a good segue into partnerships. Not only do we need to partner to fill skills gaps, but we need to partner to increase leverage and undertake proper SWOT analysis across sectors, not just organisation by organisation. Now, I'm honoured to be working with multiple collaborations and partnerships as varied as property and construction, energy procurement, not-for-profits, telcos, complementary medicines, automotive, all over the place. And to me, partnership is the new leadership. It's these sectors that will work out how to assess and address the risks of harm to people most effectively. I've loved working with the Property Council of Australia over the last 4 years. Their Modern Slavery Working Group has been meeting monthly for that long and developed a supplier platform working with Inform 365 to find out what suppliers know, what suppliers do, and what suppliers need. Importantly, it's free for for suppliers. And as the data comes through about skills gaps, for example, the collaboration has worked with KPMG Banara to launch in July this year a guide to grievance mechanisms. And in December, we'll launch a guide to effective remediation. We've gone from 15 founding partners to over 40 leading organizations representing over $1.65 trillion in assets under management. And that's where the opportunity for better insight and positive leverage comes in. But this and many other collaborations need the help of the New South Wales Commissioner to step through the different areas between partnering to success and anti-competitive, collusive or cartel conduct. So we do need a framework and guidance around how to do that safely, properly and without alarming the ACCC, so that organisations can report at both Commonwealth and New South Wales level and ensure that continuous improvement together. So risks, education and partnerships. That's my 6 minutes, I believe, but I look forward to exploring these issues with you all in the coming months. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicholas Bernhardt. I'm the CEO of Inform 365. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I thought I'd share my thoughts with you via this video. I guess just from a point of view of the insights we've had, particularly based upon our experiences with the various industry collaborations that we manage, I wanted to share some of the things that have worked really well and then maybe look forward as to where we think things could maybe progress going forward. So if I look at what's worked really well, I think the word consortia, collaboration, partnerships, that's worked really well. We've seen significant growth in that area and interest in it, which also then drives consistent messaging around modern slavery. So we've got industry consortia in a whole range of sectors such as property, utilities, and that's both for water and electricity, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, automotive, resources, not-for-profit, travel and tourism. And so that's worked really well from a point of view that a whole industry steps up to the mark and deals with modern slavery rather than everyone in their little silos with very limited impact. And I think that's been a really good success story, and I'd like to see a continuation of that going forward. I guess that triggers one of my aspects. What should we see going forward? And that is, how do we responsibly capture and share the data? And that will require obviously a highly secure platform that draws on the experiences that we might have made in that space, for instance. The other area that just ties in with that is around standardization. And that standardization of the data that is coming in and is being collected from suppliers to somehow make that process a lot easier and allow a much simpler assessment, analysis and comparison of the data, but might also, not only might, but will make life easier for suppliers as they may only have to be exposed or interact with one platform itself. Other areas that I think we need to start highlighting a bit more going forward is around engaging with the suppliers in a more detailed way. What we've done in that space is we've used what we call the continuous improvement pathways, and that's a term that was coined by Robin Mellon, who's also one of the speakers today. Continuous improvement pathways is basically giving suppliers feedback about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and potentially giving them information how their peers are also doing certain things, and where we might identify gaps, providing those suppliers with resources to potentially plug those gaps. So that's sort of on the technical side. Then I guess from a personal side and from Inform 365's point of view, we'd love to see some expectations around targets around how does an organization need to engage with their supply chain. Is it 80% of your tier ones after 3 years that you have to have engaged with, or is it 10% of your tier ones and 30% of your tier twos in year 5 or 6 or 7? So I think that there should be some clear targets there. And the reason I say this is we've seen quite a lot of larger organizations with thousands of suppliers who might have only engaged with 50 or 60 suppliers over the last 2-3 years. Whilst that is a good step to kick things off, I think there should be some expectations around what's the level of engagement with your suppliers? Last but not least, something we're very passionate about is trying to connect the dots, as we call it. And that's bringing in other ESG related matters into the mix as well. What we found, and I'll be a bit flippant here, is that someone that doesn't behave well in the environmental space typically is not a paragon of virtue in the human rights space, and vice versa. So I think if we can start connecting those dots and really shining a light on areas that have issues, and then provide those areas or suppliers or organizations with the tools and resources to adapt and amend and improve their behavior, I think that's how we'll start having some significant impact. That's my 4 or 5 minutes worth of input. So I hope this session's been worthwhile, and look forward to working with everyone going forward. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So that brings us today to the close of a really rich and stimulating webinar. Thank you to all of you who've stuck around, true believers, right through to the bitter end. Please do visit the Have Your Say website right there, the QR code, or you can find it on haveyoursay.newsouthwales.gov.au. And we look forward to continued discussion and engagement with all of you in the weeks and months ahead as we figure out how to develop this strategic plan. Thank you for all the time and effort you put into being in here today, and have an enjoyable remainder of the day. Thank you.